Bryan Rust had another spectacular year this past season, and Pat and I are going to break down that year, plus look ahead to his future right after this.
You're Locked On Penguins, your daily podcast on the Pittsburgh Penguins, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, welcome back to another episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I am one of your hosts, Hunter Hodes. You can follow me on Twitter at Hunter Hodes, joined by my co-host, Patrick Damp. You can follow him on Twitter at Cinderforwet, and you can follow the show's Twitter at LO_Penguins. Of course, thank you all so much for making this your first listen/watch of the day. We are free and available on all platforms. And finally, today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. Game off, we got to talk more about Monopoly Go. This fast-paced game lets you team up with friends for tournaments to unlock awesome prizes like unique stickers for trading, cool playing pieces, and hilarious emojis for taunting your friends. So download Monopoly Go now, free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. So, Pat, we've already done the core four for season reviews, and the next one on the list is Bryan Rust, who was tied for third on the team in points this past season with 56, also had 28 goals. And the biggest thing for me, Rust did most of his damage at 5-on-5. He only had 3 power play goals and 9 power play points total. So 47 5-on-5 points this past season for Rust. He was absolutely spectacular for the Penguins. And if you dig into the underlyings a little bit, he, along with Crosby together, were a force to be reckoned with. In 62 games, they played a little over 700 minutes of 5-on-5 ice time together. They had almost 55% of the shot attempts, 51 goals for, 48 goals against, 54% of the scoring chances, almost 60% of the high danger chances, and then 27 high danger goals for versus 23 high danger goals against. His numbers do dip when he's not with Crosby, so I do think they need to continue playing him with Crosby next season. And they've worked well together ever since Rust came into the league. So it's kind of a no-brainer to have Rust with Crosby. Doesn't matter how old Rust is, doesn't matter how old Crosby is. They just work really well together as a duo. But I'm going to borrow something that you like to say on this show quite often. Bryan Rust was someone that would always drag this team into the fight, especially when they were really down late in the season, when they were 7 to 8 to 9 points out of a playoff spot. He was still playing his tail off every single game. I think his best effort to me outside of that Red Wings game was that game against the Avalanche. I know the Penguins blew a 4-0 lead, but the way he played in that game was spectacular. He was being an absolute force on the forecheck, had a really nice goal driving to the net. Great defensively, really strong on the PK in that game as well. It was a very typical Bryan Rust game. And I do think he is in line for another really good year for 2024, 2025. I know, again, you're going to hear calls from fans and some other people to maybe move on from him just because his value is at potentially an all-time high. His contract is maybe not the greatest on the team right now. But unless you're getting a package that you can't refuse, I'm keeping him no matter what. He was awesome this year. I give him an A for this season.
He had a great year. There's no two ways about it. And it included a year with an injury that kept him out for a little while. So The fact that he's able to put up nearly another 30-goal season and play as well as he did with Sidney Crosby, I've been saying it since the trade deadline. I know that the reporting has come out that said they pretty much went up to him and said, we're going to honor your no move. We're going to keep you here. And I think that's smart because you look at the way this guy plays the game. He's a kind of player that championship teams have. And we've seen him win too with the Pittsburgh Penguins in the organization. So I'm happy holding on to Bryan Rust just because it's been great to watch his evolution as a player, as a Penguins fan, because you remember when he came up, he was looked at as pretty much a depth piece. He was going to kill penalties. He'd be good on the bottom six. And he's worked his butt off to become a legitimate top six winger. I mean, we're not really all that far removed from the Dom Lucian meme of who the F is Bryan Rust, because he was a guy who came out of nowhere. And he kind of is the inspiration for the acting a Fullerman meme of the Penguins have called up Buzz Flibbit and Mark Donk, and then you look at their stat line and they've each got 15 goals. So he's a great piece, and I always praise him for his versatility. he's a guy that you can play in just about any scenario. You can put him on a power play. You can put him on a penalty kill. You can put him on the top line. And yeah, like you said, his numbers do dip away from Sidney Crosby, but not significantly. And you're hoping in a moment where you use him in a different role away from Sidney Crosby, it's not because he's playing poorly. It's because he's a good Mr. Fix-It. He's a very steadying presence on whatever line he's on. So you can plop him onto a line and say, hey, go get this line back on track. And then in 3-4 games, you'll be back with 87 and we'll figure things out from there. So numbers aside, I mean, he has become a leader on this team. Yeah, is he one of the quote unquote core? No, because he's not a superstar, but he is somebody in that locker room that everybody respects, everybody listens to, and he's very much a leader in the way he plays.
I've said this on the show before, but he is someone that people can go to when maybe one of the core 3 or core 4 players don't want to talk. And I know I've said this before as well. He needs to have a letter on his sweater. I think they can make more room to have him have an A on his sweater because he's been here long enough. You can tell he's one of the top leaders in the locker room. Whenever he says something, this team responds. So I think it's way past time for him to have a letter on his sweater.
I don't disagree with you, but I also think he's the kind of guy that doesn't need one to be a leader. And that's not to say that Crosby, Malkin, or Letang do either. Those guys are just natural born leaders, but both in the way they play and in the way they carry themselves. I do think with that in mind, though, if there comes a time where, God forbid, Sid or Malkin or Letang find themselves out for an extended period of time, he's the first guy to take the next day. Because if Sid's out, nobody's going to take the C. You'd probably just run with 3 alternate captains. If Gino or Letang go out, he's the first guy you slap a letter on his shoulder and say, hey, in their absence, you're the second alternate. Go out there and lead the team as best you do. But overall, he doesn't strike me as a guy that needs to be named a captain in order to be a leader. He just is a leader in the way he works, the way he plays, and the way he conducts himself. And there's a lot of value in that, in what you said, that Crosby, Malkin, and Letang do a phenomenal job in relation to the rest of the league when it comes to candidates and players who face the media, because we've kind of seen it in a team that just went out in the Toronto Maple Leafs. A lot of their leaders, namely Marner and Riley, didn't talk after Game 7. And that Crosby, Malkin, Letang, anytime things go poorly, they're right there to be accountable and talk about it. And then on the dog days of the season, your December, January, February, it might be a night where Crosby, or maybe not Crosby, but Malkin or Letang just don't want to talk. Bryan Rust right there to fill in the vacuum.
Right. No, I agree with you on that. And just to go back to the point that you made about how he can fill in on any line, you're right, because his underlines, no matter what line he was on this year, were really impressive. In the 62 games, he played almost 900 minutes of 5-on-5 ice time. Bryan Rust this year, when he was on the ice, just about 53% of the shot attempts for the Penguins, also 60 goals for, 56 goals against, also 53% of the scoring chances, almost 57% of the high danger chances for Rust when he was on the ice. So obviously he was great with Crosby, but even with Malkin's line or even the third line, he was still playing his tail off every single night. Just really strong numbers from him. And hey, if he's able to stay healthy throughout all 82 games next year, I know he's going to be another year older, Pat, but I could see him definitely hitting 65 points in a season, maybe 32, 33, if not maybe a little more goals from him, just because of how great he was this year.
For sure. And there's been a lot of talk about him and reporting around him that over the past few seasons, he's struggled a little bit with injury, but that comes with age. And he's updated his training regimen, the way he gets himself ready in the offseason. And it fills back into that evolution of him as a professional, because it's really easy when you're the 20-something who just gets the call up from the AHL. You're kind of a surprise player at how effective you've been on a team that went on to win 2 championships. But, that's really easy to do when you're 24, 25 years old and all you know is winning and all you know is success. he's evolved as a professional and has adapted to what he the mileage that he has on his body. And that again folds into what a leader he's become, because it could be real easy. We saw it with a guy like Connor Sherry, who kind of figured that success is going to follow me forever and ever because I was part of 2 championships. I was a big contributor, and he never really adapted to it. And now then on the other side of it, you see a guy like Bryan Rust, same situation, comes up, big play driver for 2 championships, and he's found that consistency. He's kept that work ethic, and he's continued to be one of the better players on the Penguins.
I agree. And I think part of the reason why you've seen that stuff about injuries and all that other stuff is because he plays a really grueling style. I think he's a very physical player, especially along the board. So sometimes that results in an injury or two. So
he plays a very honest game, I think is the best way to put it.
I think so too. Yeah, that's a really good way to say it. I think that's also a good way to end this segment. Bryan Rust, grade for me, A this season. I think you definitely concur with that.
Yeah.
But overall, that'll do it for this segment. Coming up in the second segment, Pat and I are going to look at some bounce back candidates for this team heading into next season. And let's just say there are quite a few on this team. But before we get to that, we got to tell you all about our first sponsor, and that is eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience, what the formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or you'll get your money back, because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit is only available to U.S. customers. All right, we're back here on this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I am one of your hosts, Hunter Hodes, joined by my co-host, Patrick Dam. So we haven't done this yet this offseason, but it's time to look into some players who could bounce back for the Penguins next year. And I'll kick this off with a forward, and that is Rickard Rakell. If he is on the team to start next season, I'm sure you're going to see him in some trade talks this offseason. I've gone on record for this show before and said that if there's an opportunity to move him, I think I would do that, even though I do think he is a bounce back candidate, just because I'm not that big on his contract. But that said, Rakell did end the season really strongly. Overall, he had 15 goals, 37 points in 70 games, so a little over a half a point per game to end the season. But he had a miserable start to the season overall, barely even scored throughout the first month to 6 to even 8 weeks. Just looked like something was very much off. But that final 4 to 6 week stretch, he seemed to finally put it together a little bit. I think he was getting at least a little bit healthier to end the season, looking like the Rakell that we saw last year, Pat, where he almost scored 30 goals for the Penguins. And the Bunting, Malkin, Rakell line was one of the Penguins' best lines to end the season, if not their best line. I probably should say that it was their best line, I think, to end the year. And if they do decide to keep him heading into next season, I definitely think he is a candidate to bounce back and get back to being a 22, 23, 25 goal scorer, even though he's also going to be another year older. And he's also someone that has a contract that I'm not too big of a fan of.
I'm right there with you. I think that's a great bounce back candidate. And I do think he will bounce back, because I know at the end of the year, there was reporting that he could be seen most of the second half of the season with a brace on his shoulder. And when you play the kind of straightforward, physical, shot first kind of game that Rickard Rakell plays, a shoulder injury is going to hamper that a lot. You're not going to play as physical because you don't want to further aggravate the injury and take yourself out of the lineup. When you're a shoot first player, having a shoulder injury is going to impact your shot. And I think that even though his contract for the next few years is tough, the $5 million for the next couple of seasons, I think maybe next year they can move it, just because the cap will go up once again and it'll be a little bit easier for teams to take on that salary burden. But at the same time, the chemistry he's shown with Malkin, the history he has as a player, and then you put Bunting into the fold, which congratulations to him for being named to Team Canada. Big moment for him for the World Championships. But I think that assuming he's healthy going into next year, he is going to bounce back. He probably had a little bit worse of an injury than we were led to believe, and the history and performances are there for him to be right back in the fold next season.
Yeah, I agree with you. And also just going back to what you're talking about, his contract, it is 4 more years at $5 million. So I could see Kyle Dubas and company being like, yeah, we don't want to move him this year just because his value is going to be a bit lower compared to where it was last year. And they may not get that big of a return just because how many teams are going to want to take on 4 more years at $5 million with where the cap is right now heading into July 1. But a couple other players that could be primed for at least a small bounce back next season. If he is on the team as well, I am looking at someone, Pat, like Noah Chari, only 4 goals, 7 points in 55 games this season. I do think when he's healthy, he serves a purpose on the penalty kill, but man, he just got to give you more offense. I'm sorry. That's the biggest hang up with me along with his contract. I think it was just too much term for someone who just really didn't play that well this year. I do want to see what he can do without Jeff Carter. No offense, Pat. I'm sorry, but I think without him on his line, that could be better for Achari. And also maybe having Achari move to wing full time and bring in an offensive-minded fourth line center that can just drive more offense on that line, and that can help Achari. Because with all due respect to Achari, if you're asking him to drive all the offense on a line, you're asking for trouble. I don't think he's going to be the type of player that will do that. That said, again, when he's on the PK, the unit is better. I just still need to see more offense from him, and I think he can deliver that if he can bounce back and maybe gets a couple or at least one other better offensive player on his line.
Definitely. Him and Matt Nieto kind of have the same issue going into next season, is that they were really just hampered by injury, and it's hard to put an actual grade on the way they played just because they were in and out of the lineup so much. I think you hit the nail on the head, though, with Noel Achari. I think his biggest thing is he's got to have a better center, or at the very least, somebody better on his line than Jeff Carter. Because, again, similar as I was saying to Raquel, not with the Penguins, but just overall in his career, he is shown to be a very, very effective third-line player, fourth-line player if it's a really deep team. And he brings a lot of value both on the PK and for depth scoring. But at this point, it's hard for me to really put a grade on him because of the injuries. And I think that he's been very effective everywhere he's gone. And if, again, same thing as Raquel, assuming he can stay healthy next year, I think he is going to be a bounce back candidate and just a bounce back player because health really held him back all season long.
That's fair. And I will say, if they do decide to move on from one of Achari or Nieto, or perhaps both, I won't be that upset just because I think the Penguins can do better in free agency or via trade than those two players. But we'll have to see what Kyle Dubas does with the bottom 6 this offseason. Another player that could very much use a bounce back, and he needs no introduction, and that is Tristan Jarry, especially if he is this team's starting netminder heading into next season. First half of the year, flawless, playing like one of the top goaltenders in the league. Heck, we were sitting up here talking about how he was top 10 in goals saved above expected, how at least for a time he was a very mini dark horse for the Vezina after the first few months, and then it all went downhill once February started. Lost his starting job to Alex Nedeljkovic, just wasn't consistent when the Penguins really needed him, when the playoff push got very real during the final 4 to 6 weeks of the season. And the biggest thing for me, I keep going back to it, it's the consistency. I need to see him play at least a good level for a full 82 game season. And that's kind of where I hand it over to you. I honestly don't even have that much else to add. He was pretty healthy this past season. He just can't stay consistent.
I think the biggest challenge when it comes to Jarry, should they decide to keep him, is you have to find another Alex Nedeljkovic, or you have to really hope that Joel Blomqvist is ready to take the leap. Because if nothing else, I do think the biggest thing for him is that he has to maybe take a little bit less of a workload, at least early on. I think early on in the season, first month, 2 months, maybe you're not going every other game and going goalie by committee, but maybe every other game, maybe every third game you sit him down and let him get some rest. Because as we've talked about, the trend with him the last few years is that once you get into March, he starts to fall apart. And I think sometimes the simplest answer is often the correct one. Maybe this guy can't handle a full-time starter's workload, but if you give him 45 to 50 games, he can be a little bit better down the stretch. And if you can get somebody behind him, or if you have Joel Blumquist and you go goalie by committee, maybe he finds that level in March and you're going into the postseason and you go, okay, we're going to put the saddle on Tristan Jarry, give him a chance to battle his demons. But we know we have somebody on the bench who, should he falter, we can go right to him in the next game.
I just hope that they'll be able to find that goalie if it's not Blumquist, just because, again, I look at the goalie free agent market for July 1. It's bad. It is not a good market. So they might have to go to the trade market to try and find that type of goalie. A couple other bounce back candidates before we head to our final segment and make our second round picks. This one's by default, Pat. I mean, Ryan Graves, the bar is on the floor, people. If he is somehow worse next season than he was this year, I won't even know what to say. And then this one is also, I would say it's fair. Erik Karlsson, 56 points. I think he definitely has a much higher level to reach next season. You saw it down the stretch, those final 10 games. He was a point per game, was doing also everything in his power to get this team into the playoffs. But if he can play like that for a full season next year, this experiment is going to work. And I think you'll see him have 70 to 75 points next season. Now, those are my last two bounce back candidates. I don't really have too many others, I don't think, but what say you?
One I can think of off the top of my head, and right now I can't put him in the bounce back category because he's going into unrestricted free agency. This is if they decide to bring him back. That's Radim Zahorna. I mean, he looks like he could and should be a bottom six contributor consistently at the NHL level if they bring him back, which I don't really care one way or the other because he's not going to command a raise. You'll probably bring him in for the same $775,000 that you have him for now. But he's one that I look at, should have been a bottom six contributor all season long, should have never seen time in the AHL, but it just didn't really work out for him. But yeah, the two you brought up, Graves, bars on the floor, he's got to be better. And then Erik Karlsson, I don't know if I would say bounce back, but he just has to find a better level of consistency into next year. He has to be able to, at the very least, play to a certain standard for all 82 games. He can't have the peaks and valleys that he had this year. It needs to be a consistent performance through 82 games.
And I'll throw Crystal Tang in there as well. I did not like the way he played, at least the final month and a half. I know, Pat, he was great for a good chunk of this season. And the injury, it looked like, happened. But if he's fully healthy for next season, I want to see him be more consistent to end the year. I know.
That's the caveat. Once we know what the injury is, how severe it is, if it's bad like we think, then we just want him to get healthy. But if it's something that wasn't that bad, then he has to have a better second half of the season.
Agreed. Yeah, I don't want to be unfair towards Chris. I just want to see him play at the level that I know he can play at, because he was playing at that level for most of the season before the injury looked like was really affecting him towards the late stages of the season. But that'll do it for this second segment. Coming up to end the show, Pat and I are going to give an update on Wheeling and how the Nailers are really up a creek right now in their series against Toledo. And we're going to make our second round Stanley Cup playoffs picks after I went 8 for 8 in the first round. But before we get to that, we got to tell you all about our next sponsor, and that is Monopoly Go. All right, game off. We got to pause here to talk more about Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying, flag on the play. You already talked about that, but there's just so much good stuff in this game. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for timed tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock. And there's so much to get. You can get unique stickers. You can trade with friends to compete albums for big prizes, cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with, and hilarious emojis for taunting friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their own unique mini games like digging for treasure or a robot machine. And there's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers for everything you win or rent frenzies. There's always something fun to discover in Monopoly Go, so get off the bench and go download it now, free on Google Play or the App Store. Game on. All right, we're back here on this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. I am one of your hosts, Hunter Hodes, joined by my co-host, Patrick Damp. So, Pat, the Nailers, they need to really dig deep in the second round series. They lose game 1 in heartbreaking fashion in overtime. They then drop game 2 in regulation. The series now shifts back to Wheeling, where the Nailers need to hold serve at home or this thing is over.
Well, yeah, control of the series is, I know this sounds obvious to say, control of the series is up for grabs here because the ECHL Kelly Cup playoffs run a 2-3-2 format in their playoffs. So the first 2 games were in Toledo. The next 2 at the very least will be in Wheeling, hopefully 3, and then it shifts back for 6 and 7 in Toledo. And you're right. Game 1, heartbreaker. They were up 1-0 going into the third. Toledo ties it, then gets the win in overtime. And then they just couldn't catch up to Toledo in game 2, losing 5-3. And this is the thing about a rivalry such as Wheeling and Toledo, like I have been talking about. West Banco Arena is not going to be a fun place for Toledo to play. It never has been, because the fans of the Wheeling Nailers, if there's one thing they love more than anything, and I know this firsthand, they love old school hockey. If Toledo lets Wheeling get to a physical, fast-paced kind of game, that place is going to be loud for 60 or more minutes, however long that game goes, and it will be a very, very difficult atmosphere. But in all honesty, in seeing these games, with the exception of a part of game 2, Wheeling's right there. This isn't exactly like the Toledo Walleye have jumped out and beat the crap out of them. It's just been on the margins. If the Nailers can come out, play a little bit better consistently, put together a little bit better of a 60-minute effort, they're right there for it. And you win game 3, you start sowing those seeds of doubt in Toledo of, oh, okay, maybe we're in for a long series, won't be a short series. And then if you can find a way to get a win in game 4 or 5, then it becomes a total toss-up. So I'm very interested to see how the Nailers respond now that they're down 2-0 in the series.
Agreed. And I thought Justin Lee for Wheeling was really good in game 2, had 2 of their 3 goals. I think if he continues to have a really strong series, Wheeling could definitely make this a series. And if you want to go to game 3, that is Wednesday in Wheeling. You can get your tickets online or call their number. And then game 4, Friday, and then game 5, if necessary, that is on Saturday before the series shifts back to Toledo. But moving on from that, it's time for the second round in the Stanley Cup playoffs. Yes, I'm going to pat myself on the back once again, Pat. I went 8 for 8 in the first round. The haters will say it's fake. You know what? Whatever. I got all 8 series picks right, and we're going to try to go 4 for 4 in this round. I'm going to start with Carolina, New York. I'm still going to go Carolina in 7, despite the Hurricanes losing game 1 to the Rangers. I do think the Rangers played pretty decent at 5-on-5, but I think the main reason why the Rangers won that game again was because of goaltending and special teams. They gotta stop giving the Rangers power plays. The Rangers power play, it's one of the best in the league for a reason. They made the Hurricanes penalty kill, which is a very good unit, look really bad in that game. And then Igor Shesterkin, he's been really good in the playoffs these past couple of years. He was great yet again in game 1. I think Carolina is the overall better team. I think they're deeper. And if they can stay disciplined, I think they will win this series. So I'm still going to go Carolina in 7. I'm going to go Florida in 6 over Boston. It looked like for a little bit the Bruins were going to choke that lead and become the first team in MLB, NBA, and NHL history to blow 2 straight 3-1 series leads and back-to-back seasons. That was on the line for the Bruins, but they tied it, and then David Pastrnak breaks the Leafs' hearts in Game 7. I'm going to go Florida in 6 just because Bobrovsky is playing at an unbelievable level. Barkov's been great. Verhaeghe's been awesome. Reinhart, Kachuk. I just think they're a better, deeper team. And the Panthers, when they're firing on all cylinders, I still don't know if there's a team in this conference that can beat them. I'm going to go Florida in 6. And then in the West, I'm going to go Colorado in 7 over Dallas. I love how Dallas came back to beat Vegas. The way they were able to dominate the back half of that series speaks volumes to how good Dallas is, to how deep that team is. But when I look at that series, I see a Colorado team where its best players are just playing a bit higher than Dallas's best players right now. And there's really nothing anyone can do when McKinnon and Makar go insane. I think you're going to see that again in this series. And I also love Colorado's second line. Lekkonen's been great. Millsap's been awesome. If they get average goaltending from Georgiev, I think they win this series. Give me Colorado in 7. And then Edmonton and Vancouver, a series that I've been wanting to see since the playoffs started. Give me Vancouver in 7 in an upset, Pat. I'm taking Vancouver to win it. I'm hopeful that they can get back one of the other 2 goalies, namely Demko, just because he is a major difference maker in net for the Canucks. I'm hopeful that Elias Pettersson wakes up in this series. He was really bad in the first round against Nashville. And I'm also hopeful that the Canucks can stop the Oilers' power play. It's the number 1 power play in the league for a reason right now. McDavid, Draisaitl, Nugent Hopkins, Hyman, Bouchard, just a very unfair unit. I know so many people are going to take the Oilers to win this series, and rightfully so. They have, I think, the best players in this series overall. But I just love the way Vancouver is going right now as well. Give me Vancouver in 7 in upset, and it's going to be chaotic. Those are my picks for the second round.
I like it. I'm going to go the same order you were going here. No disrespect to the Florida Panthers, but the New York Rangers and Carolina Hurricanes kind of feels like the Eastern Conference Final to me. I think these are the 2 best teams left in the East. I'm with you at the same thing. I think it's Carolina in 7. They're a very disciplined team, and I think they got away from that in game 1, and it's not a trend that happens often under Rod Brind'Amour. So I think they're going to clean that up the rest of the series. Assuming Igor Shesterkin doesn't steal it, which he very much can, I do think I'm there with you. I think Carolina in 7, they're a deeper team. They can pull this one out. Florida, Boston, I'm going to go Florida in 5. I do think that Boston got a chunk taken out of them by Toronto, and they barely squeaked by a Toronto team that didn't get much of anything from its top players, and they still needed game 7 overtime to dispatch the Leafs, which is not a great sign for them. Florida's hitting on all cylinders. They've been resting for about a week, and that's just a great team. And Sam Bennett likely is going to come back in this series. So that's going to put up a world of hurt for the Boston Bruins. So give me Florida in 5 on that one. Vancouver, Edmonton, I know it's your team. I know you love them, but I just don't think they have the horses to keep up with Edmonton. I think Edmonton's going to win this one in 6. Now, I do think if Demko comes back, it gives them a little bit of a jolt, but there's too many question marks right now surrounding Vancouver for me going up against a team like Edmonton. So give me Edmonton in that one. And finally, Dallas, Colorado. I'm ready for this series, man. I think this one comes down to goaltending and defense. If Jake Ottinger continues his resurgence, I think he's maybe one of a handful of goaltenders that could match Colorado. But if Colorado's forwards get going, I don't like Dallas's defense to be able to slow them down, which could be a huge problem. But overall, I do have to go with the seasoned team here. I got to go with Colorado. I think they take this one in 7, and we're going to get a damn fun Western Conference Final in Edmonton and Colorado.
We're set up to have 2 great conference finals, I think, no matter what. If it's Florida, New York, Florida, Carolina in the East, that's going to be awesome. And then in the West, Edmonton, Colorado, Edmonton, Dallas, Vancouver, Colorado, Vancouver, Dallas. I mean, this second round is going to be great, but the conference finals are also going to be awesome. And yes, people, the Canucks, my mistress team, at least a little bit. I love watching them.
I think they're going to put up a good fight. I think it's going to be a very good series, but I just think overall, when the 2 best players in the series are on the same team, that is a monumental task for a team like Vancouver, who I don't think is going anywhere. I don't think this is a 1-year aberration. They're going to be around for a while.
Yeah, I mean, I'm concerned about Vancouver's defense just because outside of Hronek and Quinn Hughes, they have some pieces there, but is it enough to slow down the Oilers' 5-on-5 attack? That scares me a little bit. And then Stuart Skinner the goalie was pretty solid against the Kings. He's not UC Soros, but he can still elevate his game when needed as well. So I know I might be drinking some Kool-Aid with that one, but I'm still going to go Vancouver in 7. I hope I can keep up my perfect score heading into the conference finals, but that'll do it for this episode of the Locked On Penguins podcast. Thank you all so much for taking the time to listen to / watch this one. Pat and I will be back on Tuesday for another episode of the show. So for Patrick Damp, I'm Hunter Hodes. Thank you all so much for tuning in. We'll talk with you all on Tuesday.